Good evening and welcome to Coffee with the Bishop Special COVID-19, where some great things are happening in spite of what is going on. I want to tell you to keep your head up and keep you encouraged, and I promise that I'll bring you as much information as I can that will keep you going and keep you going in our communities. If you're joining for the very first time, I welcome you. Excuse me. And as I welcome you to this, I also want to say to you, share this page with someone you know. Just share it. You're going to get some great information. It's going to be very informative, and you don't want to miss this. I'm so glad to have with me today our State Representative Maureen Madden, and she's here from the 115th District. I want to say good evening to you, and how are you, Maureen?
I'm doing well, Bishop Pearman. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's our pleasure to have you on today. She is a great woman of accomplishments. She's overcome many obstacles in her own life, but what's most important is she has a heart for the people. Yes, she does. And I have to say that she does all she can to fight for all the rights of each and every person, women and the LGBT community. She's fighting for the rights of others. She fights to have the educational funding so that we can have better schools and our kids can get better educations. She works hard to make sure that the minimum wage can be raised up so we can have jobs in our community and that people can stay and our children can come back from college and have something to come back to. I'm excited about having her here today, and I want to tell her that I'm going to introduce her and say she has the floor. I want to just talk and just allow herself to flow with whatever God she's been given to give today to us. I got it kind of mixed up a little bit, so help me, just bear with me a little bit. State Representative Madden, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bishop Pearman, and thank you for the kind words. I come from, I think I represent people well because there are so many experiences in my own life that have brought me to this place. You and I speak about the fact that we are both originally from New Jersey, from the same neck of the woods. I was born in Irvington, New Jersey, and grew up in West Orange for the first 8 years of my life. And then I moved to Hackettstown, New Jersey. So when I lived in West Orange, New Jersey, I lived on one of two streets, Watchung Avenue and Babcock Place. And when we lived on Watchung Avenue, we were one of two white families on an otherwise all black, neighborhood. And so when I was raised, and my friends were black, other than my friend Simon, and I went to school in a mixed race and a mixed culture environment in West Orange, New Jersey. That was the norm for me. It was not until I moved to Hackettstown, New Jersey when I was 8 years old, and there were two Hispanic families and there were two black families that I began to understand, racism and prejudice. And I'll never forget going home as a freshman in high school and talking to my dad because they were talking about this new family that had moved in, and they were a black family because we had only had one black family at that point, and then another black family moved in. And I heard all my friends talking about it like they had talked to their parents about it, and they were saying, oh, well, they must be a good black family because the dad is going to be a professor in Centenary College, and the mom works in a bank, and the kids are straight A students. And I got to know, the children who were my I was going to say colleagues, who were my high school friends, and I went home thinking and saying to my dad, they're talking about this family like there could be good black people and there could be bad black people. And these were the good black people, and they were good because they were athletic and they were smart and their parents had careers. And I thought, like, from the moment I met them, how much pressure was on them to be smarter than the white kids and more athletic and always be cheery. And, I grew up with a dad who marched with Dr. King, whose righteous stand for the civil rights movement and for equality came when he was in the Air Force, and his commanding sergeant or higher up. I'm not really sure in the Air Force what his rank was, but they traveled together all down south, Camp Lejeune and all down south. And it left this lasting impression on my dad that here was this man who was his superior, who, you know, commanded all of this respect within the Air Force. And then they would leave the base and they would go to a coffee shop, and my dad would go in and get the food, and they would find a tree to sit under or a park or something to sit and enjoy their lunch or whatever meal they were having, because he couldn't sit in the coffee shop with my dad. So those were the kind of racial injustices that my dad wanted to impart on me, so that I would grow up not only as an advocate, but just to respect humanity. And that's how I grew up, just a basic respect of humanity. And you judge people, you know, to quote a very wonderful and, you know, Dr. King, civil rights leader, you judge some people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And so that I was raised that way. And then as I got older, I understood what my white privilege was all about. And I decided very early on that whatever, you know, white privilege or whatever, you know, came with being white, I would use that to make everybody aware that we all have a shared humanity, and we should judge people by who they are and not by how they look or the color of their skin or their accent or anything that makes us different and beautiful and diverse. And so I've always felt that way. And when I got elected in 2016, I understood that I got there because of, you know, not just all of the community, but the Black community, because overall, the Black population in the state of Pennsylvania is about 11%. In my district, in the 115th district, it's 20%. So I know that without the support of the Black community, I'm not in Harrisburg. And that's why when I got elected, one of the first things I did was went to the chairman of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus and said, I'd like to be a member. Absent of any members from my community, from Monroe County, I would like to know what you're working on. I would like to know, you know, what we're fighting for everyone, including the Black community. And so they were really welcoming. And so I've been a member of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus since I was elected 4 years ago. And now under Chairman Kinsey, we've elected so many, we have the best representation of minorities right now in the House of Representatives on the Democratic side than we've ever had in Pennsylvania. So now we're starting to address those issues, and where it might have fallen on deaf ears from some of our members in the House, the Black Lives Matter movement has made it, you cannot ignore it. You cannot brush it under the rug. You cannot pretend that this is not going on. You cannot pretend that Blacks are disproportionately incarcerated at a rate of 5 times the rate of whites. You cannot ignore that for every 100,000 people incarcerated, 375 of them are white and 3,269 of them are Black. You cannot deny that Black men are being shot in the streets. You know, I'm not sure I can even find the words, but it's just heartbreaking every day. And George Floyd, to the inhumane act of a police officer putting his knee on the neck of George Floyd while the man was begging for his life for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, saying, I'm not armed, I'm not a threat to you, why are you doing this? And then calling out for his mother. It hit a boiling point where I don't think we can ignore this anymore. And I don't think we will ignore this anymore as a nation. And you know, in the global community, we had people marching and standing with us in France and Italy and all over the world. You know, our cry for equality and our cry for police better policing and better, criminal justice laws have reached a point where I don't believe we're going back. I don't believe we're ever going back. And that is evident by the fact that we moved two bills out of committee and they came to the floor for second consideration today. And I expect that before we leave Harrisburg, and I say Harrisburg, I'm in Harrisburg remotely from my office because of the pandemic. The two bills, HB 1841 and HB 1910, which 1841 places the responsibility for maintaining a database for law officers' misconduct on the municipal police officers and provides for extra training. And then 1910 is a bill that would create a database so that a death like Tamir Rice will never happen again. And that was the unfortunate death of that 12-year-old boy who was shot and killed for having a water pistol standing out in front of a youth center by a police officer who had been employed in one police department in Ohio and then moved to a different police department. And had they done a thorough background check, they would have seen that this police officer had multiple complaints and was a danger and shouldn't have been a police officer anymore. So these are bills that are moving out of the House, that will go to the Senate, that will come up to the governor's desk for a signature. And Governor Wolf is on the right side of all of these criminal justice bills and all of these smart policing and police reform bills. So I'm confident that things are moving, and we have, maybe you know or you don't know, or your audience knows that last time we were in session before this, last week or 2 weeks ago, with the pandemic, dates just seemed to run into each other. The Legislative Black Caucus took over the rostrum. They took over the House floor, and they would not allow session to start until we got some assurances that there would be a special session just around these bills. And they got the attention of Speaker Mike Turzai, and he promised, if he was genuine in that, kudos to him. If he was thinking, well, I'm out of here in a couple of weeks, because he is out of here now, and we have a new Speaker of the House, Brian Cutler, these bills are still moving, and we're not going to let them fall by the wayside, because if I didn't say this before, we cannot have a march or two and then walk away patting ourselves on the back thinking, look what we did, look, bravo for us. This has to follow up with legislation. And this is the piece that we're here to talk about this evening. So that's kind of my introduction. I tend to speak in paragraphs. So anything that you'd like to ask me, or anybody would like to ask me, from the listening audience, I'd be happy to respond.
Well, one of the things I want to say is, again, I'm glad that you're on here. Would you tell us how that would affect your district in Monroe County, which we were just talking about, the two bills, and tell us about your transformation from New Jersey to the Poconos and what you had to deal with when you got here?
Well, so those two bills, they would, they're good bills. They're just good bills overall for all of Pennsylvania, right? Is there racial profiling going on in the Poconos? I'm going to say not to the degree that it might be in other areas, but I'm going to say it is happening, because my husband is Puerto Rican, Roy Ramos, and he's dark-skinned, and he gets pulled over a lot more than I do. So I'm just going to leave it there. So these are bills that are good. They're good training bills. They're good sensitivity bills. They're good awareness bills, so that, law enforcement knows that we're watching, right? That this is no longer going to be tolerated, and that before it ever gets to the point where it affects the public, you are going to have these internal safeguards in place, that if a police officer comes and he says, oh, I was a police officer here, we're going to do a thorough background check, and we're going to see were there any complaints, and we're going to train, and we're going to be able to make informed decisions based on these these bills, and there's going to be constant training. It's not, okay, I'm out of the police academy, so it's all good now. So I moved from Pennsylvania, I moved from New Jersey to New York. So the transition from West Orange and Orange, New Jersey to my first apartment in Spanish Harlem on Amsterdam and 113th Street wasn't much different for me. You know, when I moved to my first apartment, I felt like, you know, I had felt like when I lived in West Orange and Orange, New Jersey, that there was a you know, a mix of diverse ethnicities and people, you know, Black people and Hispanic people and white people, and I was very close to Columbia University, so there were students there as well, and so I felt very much at home. And then I lived in New York for 22 years, and I was looking to move to, I never left New York because of the people. I left because of how close we were to each other, how we were on top of each other. I left because of alternate side of the street parking. I left because of car alarms and garbage trucks at 5 in the morning. I never left because of the people of New York. And coincidentally, I moved from New York to a Pocono Country Place in Coolbaugh Township, which is a community, a beautiful community of 20,000 plus people who all live in harmony together. But, you know, we've gone through our struggles as well. You know, people malign my community and call it the Hood in the Woods and other names because it is a racially mixed community. I would say we're a third white people, we're a third Hispanic people, we're a third Black population, and we all live in perfect harmony together. Regardless of what you hear on the news, the crime rate in Coolbaugh Township and Pocono Country Place is a small city of 20,000 residents. Yes. You can put East Stroudsburg and Stroudsburg together in probably a couple of other boroughs, and you will not reach the population of a Pocono Country Place. So if you compare us to all of those other places, there is actually less crime in a Pocono Country Place and in Coolbaugh Township than all of the other surrounding boroughs. The things that you hear about gangs openly dealing drugs on the street or walking around with gang colors or drive-by shootings, I can tell you as a resident of a Pocono Country Place for 15 years, sure, crime happens, you know, in a pocket like it does in Stroudsburg or East Stroudsburg or anywhere else. But the rampant crime that you hear about just doesn't exist. It's not true. And so I love living in diverse communities because I'm at home. It's the way I've always grown up. And so, and I have to say with Pocono Mountain Regional and we have a great relationship with our police officers up on the mountain. We have a great relationship with our community patrol in a Pocono Country Place. And I think we all are on the same page where we work together just to have good policing and to have safe communities. And I couldn't be happier with where I live right now. We have a lot of work to do in Pennsylvania as a whole. And when I first moved here from the Poconos, you know, something that we talked about before, there was definitely this air of the locals and then the transplants and the people who came from New York who invaded the Poconos because there was a sense of, hey, you want to come here, you know, and vacation for a weekend, go to one of the resorts or stay for a week. That's good. That's about all the hospitality we have. But then you need to go home because we are the locals, you know, and this is our domain. And I have to say that within the 15 years that I have lived here and in the 4 years that I've been a legislator, I think with the presence of people like yourself who preach love and preach unity, and the stronger presence that the NAACP has and Monroe County United, you know, I think we are bridging that gap. Because I know that, I mean, you can speak to this. I don't know it for a fact. I only know the stories that we were, you know, the Ku Klux Klan was marching down Main Street of Stroudsburg not very long ago. and maybe the early 90s, the late 80s. I mean, I hear these stories from my white friends, you know. So, you know, I know that it's been a long struggle in the Poconos, and people like yourself who came here back in a time when you didn't see a good number of, a large number of minorities in this community really were the trailblazers and really have set, you know, the stage for all of those people who have come after you. And I feel like we're in a good place, and certainly you can speak to this, Bishop Pearman. I feel like for the 15 years that I've lived here, right now in this moment, I feel like we are united as a community to pass legislation and to respect our neighbors and our shared humanity more than I ever have felt in the 15 years that I've lived here. What do you think, Bishop Pearman?
Well, I do. I think that we've gone a lot stronger, and I've watched things change. I'm one that will always remember the history of the Bob Hillmans, who sat down with different ones to try to bring unity. Letty, she's in the Mount Pocono area. She's worked hard to bring unity within our community, as well as myself and others. And I remember those fights that we had to go through, and just trying to get BET. I remember we were trying to get BET to come, and we had to sign a petition just to get BET. And
right.
In the school district, just to get them to have something in the curriculum concerning people of color, and not to ever forget that we started the first Martin Luther King Day celebration that they ever had in the Poconos. They wouldn't even give it off. It was and when they did it, give it as a half a day first. Then they gave it as in classroom training for the teachers, and they let the students out, because we pulled our students out. So I do know, because of what has happened, and I watched what you do and others who have come into the offices that they hold, the changes that are taking place, and especially within this last month or so, where we've had so many marches within our community that have been very peaceful. Kasim Johnston, Krista Caceres, hers from the NAACP. There was another person that did one earlier before they did on the steps on Main Street right at the square. So it's been a lot of changes that have taken place, and I've watched them change. I've watched them change, and how a lot of people are being treated, as well as how we also that come from the, as they said, from the outside, are treating those who are locals too. Somehow or another, there's been some better understanding, and those bridges come because we fought and prayed and did not give up. And I remember when you could work from Pocono Medical Center, and they would keep you until your 89th day, and somehow or another on your 89th day, when you got ready to get to the 90th, you couldn't be hired, not as a person of color, and the few that were there were just randomly there. So yes, when you say those changes, I've watched them, and I've been a part of some of those changes also, and working to make things better. But I want to ask you, what caused you to want to run for office?
Sure. Well, I'd love to answer that question, but I would like to interject.